The phone had been ringing for 3 years. Every few months, someone from The Tonight Show would call Dean Martin's manager. The pitch was always the same. Johnny Carson wants Dean on the show. It'll be great television. The ratings will be huge. Name your price. And every few months, Dean Martin's answer was the same. No. It wasn't personal. Dean liked Johnny Carson well enough. They'd met at industry events, exchanged pleasantries, shared a laugh or two. Carson was talented, quick-witted, the undisputed king of late-night television. By 1970, The Tonight Show was the most powerful platform in entertainment. An appearance could resurrect a dying career or launch a new one into the stratosphere. Everyone wanted to be on The Tonight Show. Everyone except Dean Martin. "I don't do talk shows," Dean would say when his manager pressed him. "I don't like sitting on couches. I don't like answering questions. I don't like pretending to be interested in whatever the host is selling." "But it's Johnny Carson," his manager would argue. "It's not some local morning show. This is the big leagues." "I know what it is." The answer is still no. The truth was more complicated than Dean let on. Talk shows terrified him. Not the performance aspect, but the exposure. On his own show, Dean controlled everything. The questions, the guests, the topics. He could hide behind the drunk persona, deflect with jokes, never let anyone see beneath the surface. But talk shows were different. Talk shows were intimate. The host asked real questions and expected real answers. The camera lingered on your face while you talked, searching for cracks in the armor. One wrong moment, one unguarded expression, and the whole world would see what you'd spent decades hiding. Dean Martin had built his entire career on being unknowable. He wasn't about to let Johnny Carson peel back the curtain. But Johnny Carson was persistent, and in late 1970 he decided to try a different approach. He called Dean himself. Dean was at home in Beverly Hills watching a golf tournament with the sound turned low when the phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He rarely answered his own phone, but something made him reach for the receiver. "Dean, it's Johnny." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Johnny who?" "Very funny. Johnny Carson." "Oh, that Johnny. The one who keeps having his people call my people." "Yeah, well, your people keep saying no. So I figured I'd cut out the middleman and call you myself." Dean smiled despite himself. He appreciated directness. Most people in Hollywood talked in circles, never saying what they meant. Johnny Carson, for all his on-screen polish, was surprisingly straightforward. "I'm flattered," Dean said. "But the answer's still no. I haven't even asked yet. You're going to ask me to come on the show. I'm going to say no. Let's just skip to the part where you accept it gracefully and we both get on with our lives." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Johnny spoke again, his voice was different. Less the charming host, more the real man underneath. "Can I ask you something, Dean? Off the record? Just between us?" "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer." "Why won't you do my show? And don't give me the 'I don't do talk shows' line. You've done other shows. You did Merv Griffin last year. So why not mine?" Dean was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question, and it deserved a fair answer. "Because you're too good," Dean said finally. "Excuse me?" "Merv Griffin is a nice guy, but he's not going to push. He asks the easy questions. I give the easy answers. Everybody goes home happy. But you..." Dean paused. "You're different. You actually pay attention. You notice things. And you're not afraid to dig." Is that a compliment or an accusation? "Both. You're a great interviewer, Johnny. That's exactly why I don't want to be interviewed by you." There was another pause. When Johnny spoke again, there was a hint of understanding in his voice. "You're afraid I'll see through the act." Dean didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. "Dean," Johnny said quietly, "I've been doing this show for 8 years. You know how many people I've interviewed? Thousands. You know what I've learned? Everyone's got an act. Everyone's hiding something. The drunk politician, the wholesome actress, the family-friendly comedian. It's all masks, all the way down. And you want to rip off my mask on national television? No. I want to have a conversation with you, a real one. I'm not interested in exposing anyone. I'm interested in connecting. With all due respect, Johnny, that's exactly what someone who wanted to expose me would say. Johnny laughed. Fair enough. But let me make you an offer. Come on the show. One time, that's all I'm asking, and I'll let you set the rules. Whatever makes you comfortable. You want certain topics off limits? Done. You want to approve the questions in advance? Fine. You want to walk off if things get too real? I'll write it into the contract. Dean was surprised. This wasn't how talk shows worked. The host had control, not the guest. What Johnny was offering was unprecedented, a complete inversion of the normal power dynamic. Why would you do that? Dean asked. Why give me that much control? Because I'd rather have Dean Martin on my show with restrictions than not have him at all. And because... Johnny hesitated. Because I think you've got something important to say. Something real. And I want to give you a space where you feel safe enough to say it. Dean didn't respond right away. He was thinking about all the interviews he'd done over the years. The careful deflections. The rehearsed jokes. The way he'd learned to say nothing while appearing to say everything. And he was thinking about the loneliness, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying a persona that had long since become a prison. One condition, Dean said finally. Name it. No audience. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. No audience? Johnny repeated. Dean, that's not how the show works. The audience is the whole point. They watch you. They react. They create pressure. Every joke has to land. Every moment has to play. It turns a conversation into a performance. But, you want me to be real? Then take away the audience. Just you and me and the cameras. That's my condition. Johnny was quiet for a long time. Dean could practically hear him calculating. The logistics, the precedent, the risk. The Tonight Show had never aired an episode without an audience. It was unthinkable. The executives would have a heart attack. But Johnny Carson hadn't become the king of late night by playing it safe. Okay, he said finally. Okay? Okay. No audience. Just you and me. Now it was Dean's turn to be silent. He hadn't expected Johnny to agree. Part of him had made the demand specifically because he thought it would be rejected, a face-saving way to decline the invitation. But Johnny had called his bluff. You're serious, Dean said. I'm serious. One episode, no audience, just a conversation. We'll tape it and air it later so the network can review it, but there won't be anyone in those seats except you and me. Dean stared out the window at his perfectly manicured lawn. He'd spent his entire career avoiding exactly this kind of exposure. Every instinct told him to say no, to retreat behind his walls, to stay safe. But something else was stirring inside him. Something that had been dormant for years. The desire to be seen. The exhaustion of pretending. The loneliness of being unknowable. When? Dean asked. Next month, February 12th. Can you make it work? I'll make it work. Dean. Johnny's voice was warm now, genuine. Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. I won't waste the opportunity. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this. I don't think I will. Dean hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. He'd just agreed to do the one thing he'd spent 30 years avoiding. Let someone see the real him. He poured himself a drink and wondered what the hell he'd just done. The news spread through NBC like wildfire. Dean Martin was coming on The Tonight Show, with no audience. The executives panicked. The producers scrambled. Memos flew back and forth questioning whether this was a good idea, whether it would work, whether Johnny Carson had finally lost his mind. Johnny didn't care. He'd made a promise, and he intended to keep it. On the night of February 12, 1971, The Tonight Show studio was eerily quiet. The seats where 200 audience members usually sat were empty. The warm-up comedian had been sent home. The band was there. They'd played Dean in and out, but they'd been instructed to stay invisible, just background music. Johnny Carson stood at the edge of the stage looking out at the empty chairs. In 8 years of hosting The Tonight Show, he'd never seen the studio like this. It felt like a church after hours. Sacred and strange. His producer approached, looking nervous. "Johnny, are you sure about this? We've never done anything like this before. The network can relax. It's going to be fine." But without audience reactions, how do we know when something's funny? How do we know when to cut to commercial? The whole rhythm of the show depends on. Then we'll find a new rhythm. This is Dean Martin. Whatever happens, it's going to be interesting. What if he clams up? What if he just does the drunk act for an hour? Johnny smiled. He won't. That's the whole point of no audience. No one to perform for. Just two guys talking. Two guys talking isn't television, Johnny. Tonight it is. Dean arrived at 9 p.m., an hour before taping. He was dressed impeccably, dark suit, perfect tie, not a hair out of place. But there was something different about him. A tension in his shoulders, a wariness in his eyes. Johnny met him backstage. They shook hands, and Johnny noticed that Dean's palm was slightly damp. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who never broke a sweat, was nervous. "You okay?" Johnny asked quietly. "Ask me after we're done." "Fair enough. You want to go over anything before we start? Topics, structure, anything?" Dean shook his head. Let's just see what happens. That's the only way this works. If we plan it, it becomes a performance. And I'm tired of performing." Johnny nodded. "Then let's go make some history." They walked out onto the stage together. The empty seats stretched out before them, row after row of absence. Dean stopped at the edge of the set and stared at them. "Strange, isn't it?" Johnny said. "Without the audience, it's like the whole building is holding its breath. I've never seen a room this big feel so small." They took their positions, Johnny behind his desk, Dean in the guest chair. The cameras were rolling. The band played Dean's entrance music, but without an audience to applaud, the notes just faded into silence. Johnny looked at Dean. Dean looked at Johnny. And for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Johnny smiled. "So, here we are. No audience, no rules, just us." "Just us," Dean agreed. "I'm already regretting this." "Too late now. The cameras are rolling." Johnny leaned back in his chair. "Let me start with the obvious question. Why? Why the no audience condition? What were you afraid of?" Dean was quiet for a moment. In a normal interview, he would have deflected, made a joke about the audience being too ugly, or claimed he just wanted Johnny to himself. But there was no audience to perform for, no one to impress. Just the empty room and the cameras and the man across from him, waiting. "I was afraid of being seen," Dean said finally. "The real me. Not the drunk, not the crooner, not the king of cool. Just Dino. The kid from Steubenville who still can't believe any of this is real." Johnny nodded slowly. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize the sound of truth, and Dean Martin was telling the truth, maybe for the first time on television. "Tell me about Dino," Johnny said softly. "Who is he?" Dean stared at the empty seats. "He's scared. He's been scared his whole life. Scared of being poor again. Scared of being nobody again. Scared of people finding out that the whole Dean Martin thing is just smoke and mirrors." "Smoke and mirrors how?" "The drunk act. I don't drink. Not really. The I don't care about anything attitude. I care too much. That's the problem. I care so much that I had to build this whole persona just to survive." Johnny leaned forward. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, but he hadn't expected it to come so quickly, so openly. "When did you start building the persona?" "Early. Real early. When I was a kid, my family didn't have much. We were Italian immigrants in a town that didn't like Italians. My father cut hair for a living. Made almost nothing. I learned pretty quick that if you want people to like you, you can't let them see you try. Trying is weakness. Trying means you care. And if you care, they can hurt you." So you pretended not to care. I pretended so hard that I forgot I was pretending. The character became the reality. And now, Dean's voice caught slightly. Now I'm 60 years old, and I don't know which one is real anymore. The Dean that everyone sees, or the Dino that nobody does. The silence in the studio was absolute. No laughing audience, no applause. Just two men, sitting in the strange intimacy of an empty room, having the kind of conversation that usually only happens at 3 a.m. between close friends. "Do you ever take off the mask?" Johnny asked. "Almost never. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because what's underneath isn't very impressive. What's underneath is just a scared kid who got lucky. And if people saw that..." Dean stopped. "If people saw that, they might stop loving Dean Martin. And Dean Martin is all I have." Johnny was quiet for a moment. He was acutely aware that they were creating something unprecedented, not just in television, but in Dean Martin's entire public life. This wasn't an interview. It was a confession. "Dean," Johnny said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to." "Go ahead. Are you happy?" Dean laughed, but it wasn't the easy, charming laugh the world knew. It was hollow, bitter. "Happy? I don't even know what that word means anymore. I've got money. I've got fame. I've got everything everyone says they want. And I've never been more alone in my life." "Alone how?" "You're surrounded by people. That's the loneliest kind of alone. Being surrounded by people who only see the mask, who only want Dean Martin. They don't want Dino. They don't even know Dino exists." "Do you want them to know?" Dean considered this for a long moment. "That's why I'm here, isn't it? That's why I asked for no audience. Because part of me is tired of hiding. Part of me wants to be seen, even if it's terrifying, even if it might destroy everything I've built." "It won't destroy anything, Dean. The audience, the real audience, the millions of people who are going to watch this tape, they're going to see a human being, a real person, with real fears and real loneliness. And they're going to love you more, not less. You don't know that. I know people, and I know that authenticity is the rarest thing in this business. Everyone can spot a fake, but when someone is real, truly real, it changes everything." They talked for another hour, about Dean's childhood, about his marriages, about the Rat Pack, the joy and the exhaustion of being part of something so legendary, about his son Dino Jr., who was following in his footsteps, and the fear Dean felt watching his boy enter the same unforgiving business. And they talked about the future, about what Dean wanted from whatever years he had left. "I want to be known," Dean said quietly. "Not as the drunk, not as the crooner, just as me. I want to take off the mask and have someone recognize what's underneath." "Is that why you came here tonight?" "I think so. I think I've been carrying this weight for so long that I forgot I could put it down." "And you?" Dean smiled slightly. "You gave me a space where it felt safe to try." As the taping wound down, Johnny felt something he rarely experienced. Genuine emotion. He'd done thousands of interviews, met thousands of celebrities, but this was different. This was two human beings connecting through all the layers of performance and persona. "Dean," Johnny said, "I want to thank you for trusting me, for doing this. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see if the network lets you air it. They'll air it, and it's going to change how people see you." Dean shook his head. "I'm not sure I want that. Part of me wants to bury this tape and pretend it never happened." "That's the fear talking. The same fear you've been running from your whole life." Johnny leaned forward. "But you already did the hard part. You already took off the mask. Now you just have to let people see what's underneath." Dean was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, let them see." The episode aired 3 weeks later. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Critics called it the most intimate hour of television ever broadcast. Viewers wrote thousands of letters to NBC, expressing shock and admiration at seeing Dean Martin, the untouchable king of cool, reveal his humanity. But more importantly, something changed in Dean himself. Having finally taken off the mask in public, he found he couldn't quite put it back on. The walls he'd built over 60 years had developed cracks, and through those cracks, people started to see glimpses of the real man underneath. He would never be completely open. That wasn't in his nature. But he was different after that night. Softer, more present, less afraid. Johnny Carson and Dean Martin became genuine friends after the interview. They would meet for dinner occasionally, just the two of them. No cameras, no performance. Johnny was one of the few people who had seen behind the curtain and hadn't flinched at what he found. Years later, when Dean's son Dino Jr. died in a plane crash, Johnny was one of the first to call. Not to offer platitudes or publicity. Just to be there. Just to listen. "You were right," Dean told him on that call, his voice broken with grief. "About letting people see. Because now that I actually need someone, now that the mask is useless anyway, I have people who know the real me. And that's the only thing keeping me alive." Johnny didn't know what to say, so he just stayed on the line, listening to his friend breathe, being present in the only way that mattered. When Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, Johnny Carson released a statement. It was brief, understated, very much in keeping with both their styles. "Dean Martin was my friend, not the performer, the man underneath. I was privileged to meet him once on a night when the audience seats were empty and the masks came down. What I found was one of the most genuine souls I've ever known. He was scared his whole life that people wouldn't love the real him. I hope he knows now that we did. We always did." The tape of that February 1971 interview became legendary. Television historians called it a turning point, the moment when talk shows proved they could be something more than entertainment. They could be revelation. But for Dean Martin, it was something simpler. It was the night he finally stopped hiding. The night he traded the safety of his persona for the terror of authenticity. And in that empty studio, with no one watching except the cameras and a man who genuinely wanted to see him, Dean Martin discovered something he'd been running from his entire life. Being known is worth the risk. Being seen is worth the fear. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, "Here I am. This is me. No mask, no act, just the truth." That's what Johnny Carson gave Dean Martin on February 12, 1971. An empty room, a real conversation, and the courage to be himself.